Between them, they account for a third of the world's people. India and China share a border and have multi-billion-dollar trade links. But there are simmering tensions. Now, as India's Prime Minister visits Beijing, can the two sides put aside their differences and become major 21st century powers? And who do they need on their side to do that? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm David Foster. They're the world's two most populous nations, and now they want to be better friends. But what does that mean for the rest of the world? India and China are meeting to improve economic ties, among other things. Relations have been strained since they fought a 1962 border war. Yet now they say they want mutual trading to hit $40 billion by 2010. And they want to discuss global issues such as counter-terrorism and climate change. Well, both India and China have seen tremendous economic growth in recent years. China's currently the world's fourth largest economy after the United States, Japan and Germany. India's economy grew almost 10% last year. That's the same rate China's economy has grown at for the past 3 decades. Economic growth means extra disposable income. In 2006, more than 1,000 new cars hit the road every day in China's capital, Beijing. The government expects that number will continue to grow. And just last week, an Indian company introduced the world's cheapest car. The Tata Nano sells for just $2,500, and it's hoped that price will make car ownership possible for millions more. But not everybody's benefiting from the growing economies. The average yearly income in India is around $620. In China, it's just over 3 times that. Joining us to discuss the growing bilateral relations between China and India are, from Beijing, Dr. Hu Shisheng, Director of the South Asia Programme at the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. In Delhi, Professor Madhav Nalapat, Advisor to India's National Security Council and Director of the School of Geopolitics at the Manipal Academy. And from London, Dr. Kerry Brown, China and East Asia expert. Dr. Brown, let me come to you first of all, if I may, for a non-partisan, hopefully independent point of view. What do the two sides, do you believe, want out of each other?
Well, I think that China is a great model for India because of its success in attracting foreign direct investment. It's got $700 billion of FDI that it's attracted over the last 3 decades. And so there are some ways in which it offers a good development model, sort of state-led development, what's been called the Beijing Consensus. And I think the Chinese look at India as a potential market. They don't understand India maybe as well as they understand even Europe or the US. It's sort of strange, although they're neighbours, there hasn't been a huge amount of proper dialogue in the way that there has with the rest of the world over the last 30 years. So they look at India as a potential partner, as a potential partner in some of the battles over the environment and over energy supply and over trade issues in the next few years, which they'll probably be having with the developed world.
Dr. Nalapat in Delhi, let me come to you now for this one. Who needs who more, India or China?
Well, I'd just like to clarify at the beginning that I have no role at all in the government. I'm purely an academic. And so far as India and China needing each other, the fact is that both need the United States much more than they need each other. India and China are both in competition for the same markets, for the same source of technology, and for the same source of raw materials. So the relationship is much more competitive than it's complementary.
Now, how does that sit, this need for ties with the United States, alongside both India and China's friendship with Russia, and prior to that, the Soviet Union?
Well, India was very close to the Soviet Union. I don't think there's a similar warmth in ties with what has happened after the demise of the Soviet Union. The fact of the matter is that China is nightmare is that India will do a China on itself. Now, if you remember the 1970s, China leveraged US support to spark economic growth substantially and to spark its own geopolitical rise. What is afraid now is that in the new dispensation, India will do the same. India will take advantage of the growing perception of China as a rival to link up with the United States and get the same benefit that China got by linking up with the United States against the Soviet Union.
Dr. Shisheng, let's talk to you now from Beijing. Dr. Brown made the point in his first answer that he doesn't believe that the Chinese people or the government don't necessarily understand India. What is it that the Chinese perhaps don't get?
There is some truth in his words, because you see that during all those years, there are very few Chinese ordinary people to visit India. According to statistics, it said that last year, even though the India and China are the tourist year, only about 60,000 Chinese visited India. So there is a big gap while talking about people-to-people contact. So there must be some misunderstanding, misgivings, and even some prejudice toward each other. So that is the truth, that we have a mutual understanding gap.
Yeah, because last year, if I understand it right, was the year of travel designated in China, and yet while millions of people went abroad, very few, as you say, went to India. Why was that?
What is the reason behind?
Yeah, I'm just trying to explore why people wouldn't choose to go to one of their nearest neighbours.
Because there are too many reasons. You see that the South Asians, the situation is too volatile. There are news media cover too much about the unpleasant things, such as the bombings. And also, there is one reason that in the South Asian countries, also including India, has given not so much attention of the promotion of India in China. As a matter of fact, last year, there are about 35 million Chinese people visiting abroad. So there is a huge potential market. One needs mutual understanding much more better. The second is that the mass media or the other channels should not misreflect only one aspect of the other. The third is that both countries need mutual promotion.
Yeah, Dr. Brown, might it be that the Chinese and Indian peoples understood each other a little better if China stopped selling so many arms to Pakistan, India's rival?
Well, yeah, I mean, that is a source of tension, and that's one of the things that when the Chinese president went to India, I think either last year or the year before, I mean, that was one of the main sticking points. China's got a long-term involvement with Pakistan, and obviously has been doing a lot of things that have displeased India. But I think, you know, we have to remember that there's one fundamental difference between India and China, and that is that India is a democracy and China is a one-party state. And therefore, it means the dynamics between the two countries are very, very different. It means that the way that foreigners interact with India and China is very different. India does have rule of law, it does have reasonable regulatory framework, and China doesn't. And I think over the next 10 to 20 years, that's going to be the most important thing in many ways, whether China can deliver political reform, because India in some ways has already, you know, gone beyond that, and whether India is able to deliver economic reform with the democratic model that it has, or it has to slip back into something less democratic.
Okay, let's talk about specifics now. Let's talk about border issues. Let's talk about regional alliances. And let's start with trade. Big deals going on between the two countries, Dr. Brown, but there is an imbalance. China sends far more of its goods to India than India does to China. What would India want to do about that?
Well, I mean, this is the problem that it shares with the rest of the world. These trade deficits exist almost in every country that China has relations with. And I think also India is aware that China's attracted a great deal of direct investment, which India hasn't so far, not to the same extent. I think the choice is either to try and copy what the Chinese have done, but in that sense that means going into fairly low-wage areas, and I don't think that India would want to do that. I think, or trying to build what's India's most well-known advantage, which is, you know, high-tech, high-knowledge things which China, you know, which is 88% of China's high-tech exports are produced by foreign invested enterprises. So China is still not a knowledge economy in the way that I think India aspires to be.
Your quick thoughts on the border dispute, the war in 1962, nothing seems to have been settled since then. How much is that a cause of a complaint between the two countries?
Yeah, I mean, China has been willing to do deals with countries like Russia where it had long-standing border disputes and is willing to compromise. And I think it will be interesting over the next few years to see if China is going to be equally pragmatic towards India, because I think it wants good relations around the borders, and it's willing to do quite a lot in order to preserve those.
Professor Nalapat in Delhi, is it a major source of tension between the two countries, the fact that for decades now we've seen incursions by both sides, I imagine, on either sides of this disputed line?
Well, it's a matter of surprise to people in India that in this age of satellite imagery, the Chinese are not yet willing to accept the line of actual control. Now, what is being asked of them is not that they accept a legal boundary, but simply the line of control, the exact positions that both forces have on the border. They haven't done that over the last several decades, and they're still not doing that. Now, this creates a huge problem for India. Supposing you were to expand rail and road links between India and China, for example, and they pass through a state like Arunachal Pradesh that China claims belongs to China, then what happens if Chinese troops move into that place? So until at least the boundaries are defined in terms of who controls what, I really don't see how trust can be built.
And Dr. Shisheng, do you believe China's pragmatic enough, as one of our other guests suggested, to actually sort of give way ideologically on this just to get better relations perhaps with India?
I think the ideological problem is not so severe. I think the bilateral relations, now the outstanding problem, one is, as Professor Nalapato said, that the border dispute. The other is the China's relation with Indian neighbors. They cause great suspicions. But I think that as both India and China emerging powers in the world, there is more common grounds for them to cooperate. The bilateral disputes or differences will become more and more insignificant. With time going on, they will find a way to settle all those disputes. I quite believe it, because there is a greater room for us to cooperate. There is a greater responsibility for both countries to share in how to manage in the world. We should have a global view while talking about the bilateral disputes. We should go beyond the bilateral relations while talking about our strategic cooperation.
Okay, let's talk about strategic imbalances or balances here. The world's two biggest armies. What would China think if India continued growing at its current rate, became a bigger economic power, and had more say in the running of affairs in that part of Asia?
Of course, with more and more emerging, not only China but also India will also have a louder saying or bigger saying in all the rules making or regulations making in the international world. We know that up to today, the international political and economic system rules are majorly made by or dominated by the Western powers. By the way, emerging of these two major powers will have some saying in the decision-making mechanism system.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, would you be prepared, would China be prepared to allow India to grow at the rate it's growing and become a bigger power in that part of Asia than China currently is?
Of course, we feel quite comfortable with the rising of India. We are located in a different regions. We'll have the different regions to work or to cooperate. There is just as Indian Prime Minister repeated again and again that there is a great room for both of us to emerge into major powers. I also strongly believe that we'll have, with the rising of two powers, we'll have much bigger, larger or space or room to cooperate. We'll have to find more and more common grounds to cooperate. In this regard, I'm not quite agree with Nalapat Professor what he said.
Okay, well let's go back to Professor Nalapat in Delhi. Does India want to be the regional superpower?
Well, I'd like to say that 10 years ago, China was an Asian power and India was a South Asian power. Today, China is a global power and India is an Asian power. So it's not a question of what India wants to be, it's a question of what India is. And the expansion of Indian industry and the expansion of success in different components of it makes it clear that India is going to have a presence across the continent of Asia. So it's not a question of wanting or not wanting. India wants economic growth for its people. And one of the concomitants of economic growth is, as my old friend from China has correctly said, a greater influence in regional and world affairs.
Well, let's go back to what you just said about the fact that 10 years ago China was a regional power, now it's a world power, and India is now a regional power. Perhaps in 10 years' time it too will be a world power. Can the two countries so close to each other sit side by side with those sort of global ambitions?
Well, we have a rather sorry example before us, and that is the example of Europe in the previous centuries, and in fact even the last century, in which the major European powers, whether it was Germany, whether it was France, whether it was Britain and Italy, they used to conflict with each other, and as a result there were a lot of tensions in the continent of Europe. It's our hope in Asia that India, Japan, China, Indonesia, Iran, all these emerging and major powers will avoid this European situation and avoid conflict with each other. As to whether that will happen or not, personally that's in the future, and one can only hope it can happen, but one cannot be sure.
Dr. Brown in London saw you smiling as that point was made. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's who's setting the agenda. I mean, in many areas, China is much more influential, as the other guests have said, in pretty key areas. I mean, its profile, certainly with the Olympics in August, will go through the roof, and people will look at it and see an alternative. I mean, developing countries will look at China and see, as I said, sort of state-level, state-led development rather than, you know, free market-led development, and they'll find inspiration from that. But I have to say, you know, in becoming a global power, then China is also having to deal with global issues, you know, problems of its environment, and those problems are not just India's and the region's problems, but the world's problems, because of the fact that China's environmental economic model is in many ways unsustainable, you know, reliant on cheap labour, reliant on producing sort of low quality, you know, it's not low quality, but low value goods, very energy inefficient, 7 times more energy inefficient than Japan. And so, you know, I mean, those all impact on the rest of the world. And I think, you know, as the sort of people said earlier, you know, the point is that we have all to see where we can engage with China, work with China, and some areas where we need to resist China and make sure, you know, that China is a part of the international, you know, kind of the structure rather than in some ways opposed to it. I mean, I think that's not just India's job, that's the rest of the world's job
sure.
too.
But if you look at the trade that China is now doing with Africa, is there somewhere else that perhaps India would be looking to exploit in the same way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, in many ways, India can look seriously at what China's doing, and, you know, kind of go into markets like Latin America, markets like the EU. I mean, in some ways, India's got an advantage because, of course, with people like Tata and Lakshya Mittal, you know, they've got brands that China doesn't have, and they've got a kind of profile that China doesn't have. And as I say, it may be easy to do business in India because of the use of English, because of the use of a system that maybe, you know, Europeans at least are comfortable with. In a way, you know, China in the last 2 years, in fact, European investment in China has actually gone down because of the problems that investors have come across there. So it's not really as straightforward a story as saying, well, people are investing more in China. In fact, they're thinking a bit more about what they're doing there. And I think also the deficit with China will create desire for protectionism in Europe and America, which, you know, we wouldn't have that issue with India.
Dr. Shisheng in Beijing, reading an article that you wrote in the China Daily just a few days ago, saying the visit of Manmohan Singh to China was perhaps loaded with too many expectations. What were they?
You mean the expectations?
Yes.
From China, from our side? Yes, from China's side, of course, we want to, at first, that we want to establish the FTA with India or the regional trade arrangement with India. Also, we want that to establish more military CBMs with India. Anyway, we have higher expectations. Also from India's side, India also wants that during the visit or through this high-level visits, both sides can make some outstanding progress on the disputed border issues. From both sides, we have high expectations. But anyway, with high expectations means we have more motives to further increase our bilateral relations. Or it also means that we have much more room to improve our bilateral relations. But anyway, in the past 1 year, we have made a lot of progress in our bilateral relations, which has created a very friendly environment for the visiting of Indian Prime Minister to China.
Professor Nalapat, what would be the most that your people would like to get out of this meeting?
Well, so far as Manmohan Singh is concerned, he has reduced his entire legacy to one issue, which is the India-United States nuclear deal. And if he wants to make that deal a success, it's very critical that the International Atomic Energy Commission, the agency, give India the kind of exemptions it needs, and the nuclear suppliers group agree to the kind of guarantees of fuel supply that India is looking for. In this process, both in IAEA as well as NSG, China has thus far been a stumbling block. Although China gives lip service to its expressed intention that India should be an equal, India should be a rising power, in reality, the Chinese are very, very clear that India should demilitarize. India should give up its nuclear weapons. India should give up its missile technology and much of its other advanced technologies. So Manmohan Singh will be looking for Chinese support in the nuclear deal. And if China gives support, it means that China does accept India as an equal, and China does accept that India in the future world architecture is going to be one of the top global powers. So that's what Manmohan Singh will be expecting. The Chinese will be expecting, I think, concessions on trade. As my old friend in China was saying, on the Regional Trade Association, on allowing Chinese investment into India, which has got a lot of bottlenecks now. And they will be expecting that. So I think on Manmohan Singh's side, he's expecting Chinese support the nuclear deal. On the Chinese side, a much bigger access to the Indian market.
Dr. Kerry Brown in London, at the moment we're seeing two heavyweights slugging it out, not quite sure which one of them is winning on points at the moment or whether there's going to be a knockout. But the reason I think this is important to the rest of the world, it was a picture painted, a doomsday scenario in a best-selling novel, that the tensions between the two sides eventually leads to a nuclear attack on India, the Third World War. It's important for the rest of the world to be watching this carefully, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think you know, it's true that in many ways, if there's a likelihood of conflict, it's probably going to be either China with the US over Taiwan. I mean, that could happen any time, basically, if the Taiwanese in March do choose a more, it's not likely now because of the results that happened this week with the Kuomintang, the KMT being successful in the initial elections. But, you know, if there was a more stridently independent Taiwanese government, then there would be an immediate cause of conflict. And so I think conflict with India is much, much, much less likely. But I think it's clear from the comments that have been made, you know, the key thing is that you have two proud, ancient powers who want to have their slice of, you know, the 21st century, who want to, you know, kind of be respected, who want to be influential. And so beyond friendly talk and friendly bilateral visits and all of the rhetoric around that, at the end of the day, as you know, was said at the very beginning of this discussion, they are competitors. And I think it's a question of accommodation and carving out where they can work together and where, unfortunately, there will almost certainly be a conflict, and hope that that conflict doesn't become unmanageable.
Fascinating times ahead, gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Hu Shisheng from Beijing, Professor Madhav Nalapat talking to us from Delhi, and Kerry Brown in London. We've been talking about Indian and Chinese relations. I hope you've enjoyed the programme. We've enjoyed being here. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Your comments and suggestions, send them to us if you will. InsideStory@aljazeera.net. From all of us on the team, goodbye for now.